Hello and welcome everyone to the Al-Attiyah Foundation podcast. My name is Axel Threlfall. I'm editor-at-large for Reuters based out of London. I'm thrilled to welcome Sheikh Nawaf Saud Nasir Al-Sabah to the program. Sheikh Nawaf is the Deputy Chair and CEO of Kuwait Petroleum Corporation. KPC is, of course, Kuwait's national oil company. Welcome, Sheikh Nawaf, to the podcast. Look, we've got plenty to talk about given the geopolitical and the economic context, given OPEC's recent decision, and of course the energy transition. I'd like to start with the latest news on the back of the June 4th OPEC meeting in Vienna. Is the oil market, in your view, balanced right now?
Well, first of all, Axel, thank you very much for having me, and a very big thank you to the Al-Attiyah Foundation, and certainly to its founder, an old friend, and really a mentor to quite a few of us in the oil industry, Abdullah bin Hamid Al-Attiyah. From the perspective of the oil markets, we look at supply-demand balances and try to achieve those balances as much as possible. Obviously, with the OPEC recent OPEC Plus action, they're seeking that type of balance. They would not take action unless they saw that balance was in question. From my perspective as KPC, I look at it from a long-term executive point of view. So over the long term, I see demand for oil continuing to be strong and to actually increase over the next few years. And we're making the investments to make sure that we have that capacity to meet that demand. What the oil markets do over the next few months is really a question for the OPEC ministers to decide on how they see it. So obviously, from what they've seen so far, it looks like there are potential headwinds against some of increases in demand.
And look, I'll get into demand and your investment in just a moment, but I have to ask you this on the back of the June 4th meeting and the Saudis' decision to cut its own output. I think it was called the Saudi lollipop. Did you have any idea that this was coming? Were you given a heads up about that cut?
The nice thing about where I sit is I am not involved in OPEC decision making. As an executive, the sovereign representative there is the oil minister. So the oil minister comes back after an OPEC meeting and tells me what our production should be. So thankfully, I'm not involved in those.
Were you surprised by it?
No, I could see a lot of things, a lot of possibilities, a lot of eventualities coming around.
Okay. Look, the monthly report, June 11th, I think said 2023 demand is going to rise, I think, 2.5%. Where do you see demand in the second half of this year? And specifically, how optimistic are you about Chinese demand continuing to increase? I know there's been some concern about China.
Well, I've been asked this over the last 6 months, and my answer has always been consistent. I see demand in China continuing to rise. It is doing so at a sustainable rate. It is a sort of almost an assured rate as it's going through. We see that from our customers. Our customers in China, and that is our largest customer for crude oil for KPC. Those customers continue to demand at least the similar amounts of crude, if not more, and it's a harbinger, if you will, of continued good demand, but also perhaps also of just the long-term supply relationship that we have with our customers. On the second half of the year, assuming Chinese demand continues to grow and the opening continues to happen, we see that there will be good demand coming out of China. Now, numbers, nobody really knows exactly what can project exactly what those numbers will be, but we're looking forward to that.
Okay, but enough. So the response is enough to keep the market stable.
Yes.
I'd like to ask whether you're concerned about Kuwait's own market share in China, given what Russia's supplying into Asia now, especially China and India. Are you worried at all about Kuwait's position, given what the Saudis are doing, especially? Are you missing out in any way? Is there a chance you might start missing out in the future?
No, I'm not worried about that at all. Our customers have been our customers for decades. They will continue to be our customers for decades to come. It's because we have refineries and customers who have configured their refineries to take Kuwait export crude. They recognize that we are a reliable and stable uh, supplier of crude, and that if they go for an opportunistic barrel every now that and drop, for example, a Kuwaiti barrel instead, that when they come back to us, they will realize that we also have a long line of suitors outside our door for our production, that they may not have that allocation for the future. So instead, we rely on having customers for a long-term relationship, and we cater for each other as suppliers and customers for any eventuality that may come around.
And with this long line of suitors in mind, is the makeup of that line of suitors changing at all? Have you been upping exports, for example, to other markets in Europe as a result of the diversion?
Well, for Europe, the customer base there is not so much for crude oil as it is for refined products. And certainly we have. For Europe, we have taken advantage of the demand that has opened up especially for fuel oil and middle distillates by bringing online our new refinery in Kuwait, Zor, which will produce 600,000 barrels of, or refine 600,000 barrels of crude oil into quite a bit of it being low sulfur fuel oil, ultra low sulfur fuel oil. And that will meet all the standards for European consumption. We have essentially a wall of product going out from Kuwait to Europe. We've had product that initiates as crude oil produced from a Kuwaiti reservoir here in Kuwait, refined in a Kuwaiti refinery in Kuwait, transported on a Kuwaiti ship to a receiving terminal owned by Kuwait Petroleum, which is our downstream subsidiary in Europe, in Italy, and then marketed through our service stations under the Kuwait logo. So we go all the way down from the wellhead down to the gas tank, or even if it's aviation fuel, we like to say we go from the wellhead to the wingtip as well.
Mm-hmm. So let me just get that right. So you have been ramping up products to Europe at the Al-Zour refinery, and you expect that to continue unabated.
Not only Zohr refinery, but also our other existing refineries here in Kuwait, Min Abdullah and Min Al-Ahmadi. We finished the clean fuels project here in Kuwait that gives us about 800,000 barrels a day of refining capacity, that all of which will meet Euro 5 standards. So we have the product available to go to Europe, and we're capturing those opportunities.
Sheikh Nawaf, you sound, I've got to say, extremely optimistic about Kuwait's competitive position in the market. I want to explore that a little bit more, if I may. I think many would say the dynamic, for want of a better word, political environment in Kuwait which has translated into shake-ups in government and parliament. Most recently, the elections. Some might say this is being watched warily by the sector. Would you say there is a potential that this could harm your competitive position, could harm the investment planning over the next 12 to 18 months?
I don't see that at all, because we've had that for quite a bit of time, and various changes in ministers and governments here in Kuwait, but none of that has affected in any way the strategy for the oil sector and the investments that we make. The oil sector, KPC, headed by KPC, it's run professionally. I, as the CEO of KPC, work with my colleagues and my executives to run this sector professionally. We rely on support from the government, but our strategies do not change with successive governments, because the strategy of the state remains the same.
Okay, fine, fair enough. So absolutely not harming the sector in any way.
No.
Okay. Let's shift it to the transition and more broadly. What is just a big question to start? What is, in your view, the role of the Gulf oil producers in reducing greenhouse gas emissions?
We recognize, especially here in Kuwait and down through the GCC producers, we recognize that our barrel of oil is the lowest cost barrel in the world, but it's also the lowest carbon intensity barrel in the world. So between, I know this, the numbers have been reported for Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, that our CO2 emissions, scope 1 and scope 2, per barrel of production are all sub 10 kilograms. We're at about 5 in Kuwait. I think the Emirates are probably around the same. The next closest competitor to us from a carbon intensity perspective are well into the high teens and 20s. And those are some of the perhaps Permian production and other places. But then very quickly after that, you see numbers in the 40s and 50s kilograms per barrel. So we are, in some cases, 10% of what everybody else or what a lot of others producers are producing in terms of CO2 emissions. But we will not rest there. We recognize that at the end of any energy transition, oil will remain a part of the energy mix. Right now, it's about a third of the energy mix. In the future, it may go down to about a quarter, but the pie will be larger. So a quarter of a larger pie of more energy demand, that will still remain there would still be a robust demand for crude oil. We then are positioning ourselves to ensure that we are the producers who are not only the lowest cost, but the lowest carbon intensity. So I'm saying we are at the forefront right now, but we will continue to invest to go down to zero carbon emissions. We've announced our 2050 net zero carbon emissions strategy. We are rolling out the implementation plan on how we will get there, and we intend to be essentially the last barrel producing it within this sector. So as you go through the energy transition, we will continue to have hydrocarbons production. It will just be our production more so than ever before.
Okay. So again, quite optimistic as it sort of vis-a-vis Kuwait's role in the transition. What about, more specifically, what about carbon capture projects? What about hydrogen production for local use or export? What can you tell us a little bit about any plans in the works?
Well, certainly we're looking. Yeah, that's all part of our energy transition strategy. We're looking at the various options to reduce and essentially decarbonize the production of oil here in Kuwait. We've started with solar. As our fields begin to age, we've been producing oil for 80 years now, and natural in every field, you move on to secondary recovery techniques, and you'll need more energy to produce a barrel of oil. So what we're doing is using renewable energy to power up the facilities that we will need to produce those additional barrels. For example, as pressure begins to wane in much older reservoirs, you would put in electric submersible pumps into the wells. Those pumps, as their name says, they're run by electricity. If we can run those pumps, and they do demand quite a bit of electricity, if we can run those pumps using solar power, then we will not have increased the carbon footprint of that same barrel of oil, even though the pressure will have decreased in the reservoir over a longer period of time. We started that project. We started that project with a pilot called Sidra 500. the reason we named it Sidra 500 is because it is the environmental equivalent of planting 500 Sidra trees, because we are running the ESPs completely on solar power. It's a small pilot, but we've learned quite a bit from it. Cost remains relatively high. It's not yet prohibitive, but we're working how to bring those costs down so that we can roll it out across the rest of our fields here in Kuwait. That's one on the electrification side. On the CCUS side, and really we're stressing CCUS, the utilization part, not just the CCS, which is just the storage part. We've worked on a pilot. It's also been successful where we inject CO2 that we will capture from our refineries and power stations here in Kuwait, inject it into the reservoirs to maintain pressure and stimulate production. The CO2 will replace what would otherwise have been injected, which would have been either natural gas or water. Both of those are very dear commodities now, and they are better used elsewhere within Kuwait. So we can do two things: essentially take carbon that would otherwise have dissipated into the atmosphere, and two, free up other sources and cleaner sources of energy for other uses within Kuwait, rather than inject them into a reservoir to maintain pressure. So we've started that. It's been extremely successful from a technical point of view. Problem is the cost, because the CO2 that you inject will come back up with the oil at some point, and CO2 has a very corrosive effect on the metallurgy and the facilities that were not originally designed for this much CO2. So we're looking at how we can bring in liners. We can work on the metallurgy to retrofit facilities that cost multi-billions of dollars rather than replace them.
Okay, and a very quick word on the hydrogen piece, hydrogen production.
And yes, the hydrogen on the last part, hydrogen remains part of this plan for us. Certainly, we would begin with blue hydrogen to remove the CO2s and essentially of the production of that hydrogen, and again use that CO2 in the CCUS. Green hydrogen we will get to once we have enough renewable energy, and there would be solar and wind, and that would be on a state level. Much bigger than just KPC on this
one. How big a role does Kuwait intend to play in Dubai for COP28? How are we going to see you represented there? And I guess the question is, what do you want to see come out of Dubai? What is essential to come out of Dubai?
What's essential that we would love to see coming out of Dubai is an open, honest dialogue that includes all the parties that need to be heard in this. And from this perspective, I say that a call on elimination of hydrocarbons within a artificial timeline will essentially lead to extreme economic dislocation and human suffering because you need hydrocarbons over the next few decades. But how can we work responsibly with partners around the world to find the technical solutions and then also the funding to implement the offsets and the hydrocarbon and the carbon reduction that we are all looking forward to? That requires all of us to be working together to a common goal, as opposed to being adversarial in the discussion.
But are you hopeful that this will be more than just another talking shop?
Yes, I think the where it's based this time, obviously in the United Arab Emirates, is extremely important for all of us, because it really gives us a voice where we expect to have an honest dialogue. There'll be commitments that we will all have to put forward on our side, but at the same time, we also want a recognition as well that when we go talk to research institutions and lending institutions, that they are open to working together to decarbonize production until such time as the alternatives are found.
All right.
But to say that that you are the enemy at this point without an alternative is really a foolhardy exercise.
Yeah. All right. Look, I'm going to leave it there, Sheikh Nawaf. I really appreciate your time today and your candor. Thank you to everyone as well for listening in. Be sure to keep up to date with all of the Al-Attiyah Foundation's work by following on Twitter and YouTube. Also watch the space for the next in the podcast series. I'm Axel Threlfall for Reuters out of London. Many thanks and goodbye.
Thank you, Axel.